Genesis doesn't give us a lot of information about the period of time leading up to the flood. Either the Adamite population absorbed the earlier Ubadans or simply supplanted them, but the population that emerged speaking a Semitic tongue is called Akkadian by historians.
Although the Sumerians believed in a pantheon of over 3,000 gods, the Akkadians put their faith in a triad of Elu, the father god we also see as Anu, Ea, the water god, god of wisdom and creator of mankind, and Enlil, whose name translates to Lord of the air, breath, or spirit. As contact developed over the years, the Akkadians became influenced by the more culturally advanced Sumerians and also began to adopt Sumerian gods to which they gave Akkadian names. Inanna in Sumerian became Ishtar in Akkadian. The Sumerian sun god Utu was adopted by the Akkadians as Shamash, still the word today for the sun in Hebrew. Idol worship too figured in, and decadence increased as the Adamite Akkadians slowly declined from a population that once called upon the name of the Lord during the time of Seth, to one whose every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, it says in Genesis 6:5.
Although the close-by Sumerians may have been the catalyst for this slide into moral depravity that led to the flood, they were not the primary target of the flood. Those who came from Adam were accountable, and the flood was intended for them.
In the intervening years from Adam and Seth, when men called upon the name of the Lord, to the time of Noah, when evil filled their hearts, the sons of Adam not only failed to fulfill God's plan, they slid gradually into moral decay. Only the righteous Noah and his sons were preserved by building an ark and riding out the ensuing flood with an entourage of animals, although a few Sumerian boatmen on board remains a possibility. Josephus mentions companions who feasted with Noah at the end of the voyage. One of the companions may have been the boatman, Puzar Amuri, named in the legend of Gilgamesh. The writer of Jubilees also included some valuable information not found in Genesis. In addition to the patriarchs from Adam to Noah, he also gave us the names of the wives and traced their immediate ancestry to other members of the Adamic family tree until he got to the sons of Noah. And there he listed names unlike any of the Hebrew names who were wives to the pre-flood patriarchs and gave no clues where they came from.
We can only surmise that the wives of Ham, Shem, and Japheth came from the indigenous population, perhaps from Sumerian families. This intermarrying would have the effect of reducing lifespans, as the righteous line of Noah, some of whom lived over 900 years, had children by wives who did not share the same bloodline. And the lifespans of their descendants grew shorter and shorter over time, as recorded in Genesis.
Shem's wife must have come from outside the family line, reflected by her non-Semitic name. And the lifespans of succeeding generations, Arphaxad, Shelah, and Eber, failed to make it to 500 years of age. The next 5 generations did not see a 250th birthday. Abraham and Isaac passed away at 175 and 180 respectively. Jacob died before reaching 150, and so it went. Intermarriages between the long-lived Semites and their short-lived neighbors produced children who died off at increasingly younger ages. Gradually, the results of mixing between Adamites and non-Adamites took its toll.
Although the Adamite population was destroyed by the flood around 2900 BC, the Sumerians located a little further southeast escaped the brunt of the flood, and some survived. We know that because the Sumerian king list tells us that cities inundated by the flood were resettled afterwards, and the city of Kish was the first, followed by Enoch, the city Cain had named for his son in the pre-flood era. Some Sumerians were likely casualties, but as a culture they survived, and populated areas beyond Mesopotamia around the globe were unaffected.
The sons of Noah and their families remained in the hilly region where the ark landed, where the families of the three sons established 3 cities, divided into tribes, and built their numbers for 350 years until Noah died. Although the exact location where the ark came to rest is unknown, a remote mountainous location with soil suitable for grapes and olive trees was necessary. Also, the availability of copper ore was essential, from which they could fashion swords and perhaps protective armor necessary for their own defense, and to carve out their own living space in some areas that may have contained potentially hostile indigenous populations. Their places of habitation were worked out in advance, and upon the death of Noah, around 2550 BC, individual tribes set off toward their designated lands. As far as we can tell, only the Canaanites deviated from the original dispersion plan and took their living space where they were not supposed to be, on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, an area rightfully claimed by the Israelite nation after the exodus from Egypt.
No evidence of habitation by the tribes of Noah can be traced to any earlier than 2500 BC, which can be thought of as an upper limit to the approximate date of the dispersion described in Genesis 10. With the flood at 2900 BC, the proposed dates coincide nicely with available archaeological evidence. Attempts to push the entire Genesis narrative into a distant past in order to align the biblical narrative with anthropological data would be constrained severely by these dates that have a considerable amount of biblical, historical, and archaeological evidence.
Traces of the progeny of nearly every grandson, great-grandson, and tribe mentioned in Genesis 10 has been found thus far in northern Africa, the Near East, including Arabia, Anatolia, and Persia, and along the Mediterranean coast. The Jewish historian Josephus was aware of some of the destinations and included them in his history of the Jews.
Josephus knew the locations of many of the tribes that set off to settle new lands about 4,500 years ago. Others have been found by modern researchers. Japhethites headed north and west. Hamites settled in parts of North Africa, while Semite tribes took parts in Arabia or remained in or near Mesopotamia. Asher established Assyria. Elam went to Persia. Egypt was home to Mizraim, Canaan to Judea, and so forth.
Any textbook on anthropology would quickly confirm that the sum total of the world's population didn't come into being within the last 4,500 years. Even Josephus was aware that the world's population consisted of far more than Noah's progeny.
Each colony took possession of that land which they light upon and unto which God led them, so that the whole continent was filled with them, both the inland and the maritime countries. There were some also who passed over the sea in ships and inhabited the islands, and some of those nations do still retain the denominations which were given them by their first founders. But some have lost them also, and some have only admitted certain changes in them, that they might be the more intelligible to the inhabitants.
Inhabitants, so called by Josephus, would be called native populations today. He gave one example, citing the Greeks. For when in after ages they grew potent, they claimed to themselves the glory of antiquity, giving names to the nations that sounded well in Greek, that they might be better understood among themselves, and setting agreeable forms of government over them, as if they were a people derived from themselves.
Just as non-Greeks could be called Greek by virtue of their location within Greek borders, so too could native Egyptians, who had lived there for thousands of years, be summed up as Mizraim, the name of Noah's grandson, for just one further example.